Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Carly Stevens. I am a teacher and author, and this is English Nerd. Okay, today we're going to talk about Dante's Inferno, Cantos 5 and 6, but before we do, a reminder that Laertes, a Hamlet retelling set in the 1920s, is available anywhere that you get books. It's my latest release, just came out. Okay, I said last time that I always say, let's dive in, and I still do it, even on this channel. It just has a different ring when you're talking about Dante's Inferno. So I have videos introducing Dante and then looking at all the cantos up to this point. The intention behind this series is to offer something new after you've read the poem yourself. So as always, don't plagiarize these ideas and pass them off as your own. Hopefully you're learning some good stuff about Dante though. All right, Cantos 5 and 6, we get to circles 2 and 3 in these cantos, and we learn a lot about the trends of the souls in the Inferno in these sections as well. So we, in the last video, looked at Limbo with the virtuous pagans, Virgil, Aristotle, Homer, all those people, and then Virgil continues on with Dante, and now in Canto 5 they're entering Circle 2. Circle 2 does not have a special name or anything, it's just Circle 2, and it's designated by its the group of people there, just like all of the circles. Everything's extraordinarily ordered with the group of souls that is being punished there, the punishment that they have, and the way that those two things go together. So, as they head out of Limbo and they're headed into really what I like to think of as hell proper, they run into Minos. Minos you may know from the Minotaur myth. He is the king of Crete, but the version of Minos that we get in this poem is not super consistent with those old stories, so I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but let's look at his description here. It says, there Minos sits, and again I'm using the translation that my school uses, even though I'm fully aware that there are better versions out there that I would recommend if you're reading this on your own. Okay, there Minos sits, grinning grotesque and hale. He examines each lost soul as it arrives and delivers his verdict with his coiling tail. That is to say, when the ill-fated soul appears before him, it confesses all, and that grim sorter of the dark and foul decides which place in hell shall be its end, then wraps his twitching tail about himself, one coil for each degree it must descend. There is quite a bit to unpack here. I want to draw your attention back to Canto number 3, first of all, because in Canto 3, Dante saw that group of souls all crowding around the Acheron, which was the river separating them from the vestibule of hell, that antechamber area, to hell proper, and Dante asks, why are they all seeming so eager to get across? And Virgil responds that there's this pull toward justice, and I'm paraphrasing here. But the people who are confessing to Minos, it's that same kind of sense of rightness. Now again, when we see these souls in the different sections, not every one of them is like, oh, well, thank goodness this is exactly where I ought to be. But at least when people first arrive, there is this pull toward whatever section that they're in. And the way that happens is that they confess their sins to Minos, assuming that they weren't just virtuous pagans who seem to get off the hook here, because according to Virgil, they didn't sin. But if you did, then you confess everything to Minos. Minos wraps his tail, his weird serpent tail, around himself for the number of circles, and then you just fall away through space because you don't have a physical body. This is mentioned several times in the poem. Dante can move rocks, for example, when he's walking, and the souls can only interact with those things that are part of the punishment that they're suffering. Otherwise, they're insubstantial. So they just fall through space until they reach the place where they belong, and that is where they are stuck. So a few other things about this. This is one of the places, we've already seen at least one other, but this is one of the places where we see a kind of reflection of the divine, of the church, of God in the Inferno, which is not necessarily where you would expect to see some of those echoes. But remember, the words above the gate of hell are etched onto the gate of hell. There was, I am the way, I am the way, I am the way, which was a direct allusion to the words of Christ, but this is the kind of anti-Christ area. And then here we have people confessing to this monster, this grinning, slimy-tailed monster, and it's this mockery of the priesthood. So Minos is a kind of anti-priest. So different commentators have made the argument, I understand, that the Inferno is meant to be almost like an inverted cathedral, and here we have the anti-priest. So just keep your eyes open for some of those biblical seeming elements, but instead of confessing to a priest and finding some absolution, you confess to Minos and instead get hurled immediately to your eternal punishment. So it's twisted, right? All right, Minos is not a big fan of letting Dante pass because remember, abandon all hope, you who enter here. You can't just waltz. One does not simply walk into the Inferno. But apparently Dante does, and Virgil responds basically, be quiet. This has been willed where what is willed must be. I didn't point this out earlier, but Virgil says the same thing to Charon, the demon ferryman who takes all the souls across the Acheron. That has been willed where what is willed must be. So the just emphasizing the omnipotence and the omniscience of God. If God decrees something, then there's no pushing back against that, is basically what Virgil says. So then they get past Minos, and there's a pretty clear parallel between the Charon instance and then this, but you can make those connections yourself. So we enter circle 2. Each circle has its own sort of ecosystem, I guess. In this one, we have a dark windstorm, basically. It says, line 28 or so, again, canto number 5. I came to a place stripped bare of every light and roaring on the naked dark like seas racked by a war of winds. Their hellish flight of storm and counterstorm through time foregone sweeps the souls of the damned before its charge. So you have these particular souls in this dark windstorm just being blown about, stuck in this kind of endless tornado. And this is the group of people. One of the reasons that I don't like this translation is that they call this group the carnal. I mean, yes, but especially if you're in high school or something, I just don't like the choice of words. I feel like lustful is more correct and more common, and why would you not use that word instead? So I'm going to say these are the lustful. These are the people who were utterly controlled by their appetites in life, particularly their desire for love and sex. And so you have many adulterers and people like that in this section. The ones who are named, no surprise, there is Paris and Helen, there is Dido, there is Cleopatra. Interestingly, this is by far the greatest number of women that we're going to see in one section, kind of highlighting an understood bias against women. I think I've talked about in some of my other Shakespearean videos how for a long time there was this idea that women were, if not controlled, then their passions would run out of control, which is an assumption that you even still see in like 80s movies where some random guy will flirt with another guy's girlfriend, and it's like, oh, why are you talking to my girl? As though she would just jump ship at the first other person who talked to her because she has no control. I mean, if there's a danger of that, then maybe the issue is not the other guy, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, that's a separate thing. We do have some guys here besides Paris. We have Tristan from, I think it's from Tristan and Isolde, and then Achilles. Achilles, I think that this was an interesting choice, one that I am very surprised by. I feel like a much more natural fit for Achilles would have been the violent against others because of his rage monster tendencies, but Dante was thinking of a story that actually isn't even that well known in terms of Homer, but anyway, so all these people are the lustful, and here they are blown about by the winds. I mentioned with limbo that there is, actually I mentioned before that with the opportunists, that there is this term, contrapasso, the idea that the punishment fits the crime. We looked at that with the opportunists, with the people in limbo. And here, just as these lustful individuals allowed their passions to completely control them in life, now they're, again, wildly out of control, being blown this way and that. And that is one of the clearest ways that there's this punishment fits the crime sort of thing. I also want you to notice that this is the very first circle past limbo that we encounter, and the sins get worse as we go down. The one at the very bottom is going to be treachery, betrayal, very intentional harm to people that you have no business intentionally harming. And so you'd think it would surprise a lot of people to find that we have adultery so high up. But the reason for that is that beginning in circle 2, and there's a lot of groundwork being laid in these first cantos, so some of them will go faster than this. What's happening is that starting with circle 2 and going through circle 5, all of that is considered upper hell, and then you reach a barrier and then it gets to lower hell. But in upper hell, the sins are not quite as serious. They're characterized by intemperance, so taking a good thing to an unhealthy extreme. There's a lack of intentionality about it. Dante is still saying this is bad. Obviously, don't commit adultery. Don't do things like that. But he's also saying that these people, and again, you don't need to agree with Dante's reasoning, but I want to help you understand it. What he's saying is that these people, yes, they took their desire for love and sex to this very unhealthy extreme, but they took something that in its best form is a very good thing to an unhealthy extreme. And then we're going to see throughout the first few circles that same trend. It's something, maybe not quite as good in its best form, but good things taken to this extreme that become very, very unhealthy. So that's why this group is so high up. All right, let's cut to the famous bit. You'd think that Dante would want to talk to Cleopatra or something like that, but instead he sees, he says around line 74, "Poet, I should be glad to speak a word with those two swept together so lightly on the wind and still so sad." So he sees these two and he's just amazed at how they're actually flying both lightly and together as well. Now what follows is one of the most famous passages in Dante's Inferno. It's the Paolo and Francesca conversation, although Paolo does nothing but cry. It's all Francesca who's speaking. And she is a kind of polarizing figure, because some people read this and they think, oh, how romantic, the story of how she ended up here, she and Paolo. And others see some red flags. So I'm just going to read it. I'm going to point out some of the red flags that we see, not only with Francesca, but also with many other souls here in the Inferno, even though it might not be immediately obvious. Paolo and Francesca, I'm not going to get into their whole backstory. You can look at the footnotes in your copy for that. But they are mostly famous for this passage, more so than they are famous of their own accord outside of it. Okay, so they arrive. Dante calls them over in the name of love, and every year when I teach this, the amount of self-control that it takes not to break into song at that moment is, just give me a pat on the back. All right. I'm going to read part of what Francesca initially says to Dante. She arrives. And this is line 98, it looks like, in that neighborhood at least. So if you're reading along, then head there. There are 3 stanzas that all begin the same way, and that's what I'm looking at first. She says, "Love, which in gentlest hearts will soonest bloom, seized my lover," that is Paolo, "with passion for that sweet body from which I was torn unshriven to my doom. Love, which permits no loved one not to love, took me so strongly with delight in him that we are one in hell as we were above. Love led us to one death. In the depths of hell, Cain waits for him who took our lives." This was the piteous tale they stopped to tell. Okay. Few things. It's admittedly beautiful. Starts all the same way. There's some nice parallelism. I love parallelism. Big fan. It sounds a little rehearsed, even for this poem. However, if there's something that is so obviously artfully crafted as to begin with that same word, it's not yet a red flag necessarily, but when paired with a lot of other information, it contributes to a red flag. So it sounds a little bit rehearsed. And we notice that Francesca here starts to blame everyone and everything for her choice but herself. Here she very boldly accuses love itself. Now in Dante's world here, which is based more or less on the Bible, God is love. And so to accuse love of being the one who is to blame for all of this is a gutsy sort of move. Also, notice, love seized my lover with passion for that sweet body. So she blames not only love, but also Paolo. Takes 2 to tango, my friend, and that's how this went down. She was married. She slept with Paolo. Okay, so she's blamed love, she's blamed Paolo, and then she ends this section of her monologue really with Dante, because I don't think, has asked a single question. He just said, "Speak with us, please," with saying, well, the person who killed us is much further down in hell, as to kind of lighten the severity of what they've done. And it's true. I mean, her husband discovered them, killed them both. That's obviously wicked as well and not something to be condoned. But all of these things are collectively tempering the responsibility that she is taking for sleeping with Paolo. And it's just gonna ramp up. It's if this were all that she said, then there would be barely enough to kind of scrap together a red flag, but there's most definitely more. So Dante's immediate reaction is to weep. He says, "I'm just melted into tears of pity and pain." So just put a pin in the idea that he pities Francesca immediately. He feels so bad for her. We'll return to that. Okay, let's look at how she and Paolo fell into this affair in the first place. This is line 124 and onward. She says, "On a day for dalliance we read the rhyme of Lancelot, how love had mastered him. We were alone with innocence in dim time. Pause after pause, that high old story drew our eyes together while we blushed and paled, but it was one soft passage overthrew our caution and our hearts. For when we read how her fond smile was kissed by such a lover, he who is one with me alive and dead, breathed on my lips the tremor of his kiss. That book and he who wrote it was a pander. That day we read no further." Okay, we get a tasteful fade to black there, but it's very clear that this is the first time that the two of them got together. They were reading a book about Lancelot, who very famously is another person who slept with a married woman. Guinevere, the wife of King Arthur, and everybody in Camelot knew that Lancelot and Guinevere were together, except for Arthur, who was apparently utterly oblivious. So they're reading this story, and she makes it clear that he was the one who made the first move. I mean, yes, they're making doe eyes at each other, but he was the one who made the first move. So again, she blames him. But she also blames the book. If you look at line 134, she blames the book, and she blames the person who wrote the book. And she never blames herself. Not in any outright way. She's just blaming everyone around her. So when you see that Paolo and Francesca are together in death, again, some people read this very romantically, thinking that Francesca's husband was abusive or something, and that's a whole other kind of talk. But here, what we need to see is that clearly they crossed a line when they did that, and so some people read it romantically. But honestly, who would want to be stuck in the Inferno with somebody who blamed you for getting them there? I feel like that would just be another level, like a layer of hell, right? It suddenly is not romantic, it's the opposite, and it makes sense that Paolo's crying through this entire thing, because how terrible is that? So, what we see with Francesca is pretty indicative of almost all of the souls in the Inferno. Even though at the beginning they're rushing the banks of Acheron, they're confessing their sins to Minos, there is very, very little remorse, responsibility, anything that could have gotten them out of that predicament, anything that could have saved them in life. They just kind of continue to not see what they did as wrong, even into death. They're unrepentant. If they had repented, according to the logic of Dante and most medieval early Renaissance writers, even if it's at the very moment before your death, there's still time for repentance. After that, there's no time. And here we just see Dante kind of underlining the idea that these souls don't take responsibility for what they did. They kind of chose their own path, is I think where he's going with that. Okay, so Dante feels really sad, and again, he faints. This is his second time fainting, I believe. The other time was at the river. And so we see at the beginning of the Inferno, at least, that Dante feels really bad for the sinners. He basically is disagreeing with the predicament, not seeing the justice of it. He just sees the pain, and he has compassion. This is going to be a complicated issue moving forward, because Dante needs to eventually see, according to Dante, that Dante the poet, that is, that the justice of God is right, that it makes sense, and he needs to agree with it. But it's going to be a little bit hard to take at times, because in life, people have that chance to repent, right? People need that compassion. But in the Inferno, that time has passed. The thing to do is going to be to agree with what's happening. So just, prepare yourself for that coming up. Time for Circle 3. I know this video is getting a bit long, but so much groundwork. We'll zoom once we get to zoomy places. All right, the gluttons are in Circle 3. I said, with Circle 2, it's intemperance that characterizes this section of hell. Not an intentional harm or anything, but just taking something good to this unhealthy, bad extreme. Gluttony is not generally considered a sin these days, but we can see the logic of what Dante's creating here by saying, okay, food and drink. I love food and drink. Big fan. Those are good things. But when they take over your life, your thoughts, your finances that could be used to help others, things like that, it becomes something unhealthy, negative, selfish, greedy, all those things it's just a manifestation of that. Okay, we're in canto number 6. Line, what is that, 7? Yes, the third stanza of canto number 6. Dante says, I am in the third circle of the torments, here to all time with neither pause nor change. The frozen rain of hell descends in torrents. Huge hailstones, dirty water, and black snow pour from the dismal air to putrefy the putrid slush that waits for them below. Here, monstrous Cerberus, the ravening beast, howls through his triple throats like a mad dog over the spirits sunk in that foul paste. His eyes are red, his beard is greased with phlegm, his belly is swollen, and his hands are claws to rip the wretches and flay and mangle them. And they too howl like dogs in the freezing storm, turning and turning from it as if they thought one naked side could keep the other warm. Okay, quite a few things to unpack there. Cerberus, first of all, but it's not a Harry Potter fluffy Cerberus. This Cerberus is really, really disgusting. But this is the three-headed dog that you were thinking it was, which is, of course, a part of classical mythology of the underworld. There's the three-headed dog at near the entrance of the classical version of the underworld. And here we have, toward the beginning, this same creature, because, of course, Dante is still trying to put all of these pieces together to coexist in a way that makes them all nice and orderly and pulling toward the a version of the biblical narrative. So we have Cerberus, who is disgusting. He is not only howling, but he's ripping the souls. The souls are in the mud and the slush. There's that dirty, cold rain and slush that's coming down. So it's pretty clear that there's a contrapasso here. The punishment fitting the crime of being obsessed with that food. Instead of being able to eat and be comfortable, they are now in the position of being food almost, in terms of Cerberus, and they're not comfortable whatsoever. They're in this frozen slush and they're trying to turn over and over, and there's no way that they can find that comfort or that warmth that they found with food and wine. So there's that, but there's another level as well. Not only is this snow and hail and just bad weather in general, but it's also described as dirty. We have black snow. That's not how snow ought to be. Don't eat the black snow, don't eat the yellow snow. And so there's another piece to this that is the implication that these gluttons, these people who live this kind of lifestyle, didn't actually produce anything of value in their lives. Instead, all they produced was, this, basically. Just connect those dots for me. And so here they are in what they produced in life, which is nothing but this disgustingness. Cerberus is threatening Virgil and Dante at this point because, as you just heard in that long description that I gave, he's gross, he's violent, he's doing all this stuff. And so Virgil, to get past Cerberus, picks up a clod of that nasty mud stuff and throws it into one of the mouths of Cerberus, like making him eat this disgusting stuff, which shuts him up for long enough that they can continue on. And Dante can encounter yet another person, this time somebody from Florence. He's going to run into so many people from Florence, Italy, which is where Dante is from originally, but he wrote this in exile. More details on that in the introduction video if you haven't checked that out yet. So the person that he runs into is Ciacco, whose nickname is the Hog. I feel like that's kind of a red flag already. If that's your nickname, maybe you should think, is my lifestyle a healthy one? A positive one? Perhaps not. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Ciacco, but I'm going to just point out some of those continuing trends that we see with the different souls in the Inferno, and a new one or two as well. So Chiako introduces himself. Dante feels bad for him. The pity continues. That has been his only reaction so far to these sinners, is to pity the predicament that they're in. And then there's this weird moment around line 60, kind of just before and just after that, when Dante says, "Tell me, if you can, what is to be for the citizens of that divided state?" Talking about Florence. And Chiako immediately responds, "After many words given and taken, it shall come to blood. White shall rise over black and rout the Dark Lord's force, battered and shaken," etc., etc. It's like all of a sudden we're in Lord of the Rings, right? Which, love Lord of the Rings, but that's not what's going on here. The white and black that he's referring to are the political parties, the white and black Guelphs. So it was political parties, not a racial divide, not a good and bad sort of divide. I mean, Dante was definitely on the side of the white Guelphs himself, but what's happening here is that Chiako is giving a political prophecy. We learn from him that all of the souls in the Inferno can see the future. And later on, we find out a bit more about that special ability that they all have. As time gets more contemporaneous to when they are living, the reality becomes hazier. So they can't just think of Earth and see the people there. It's only the future that they're able to see, and then it becomes hazy. So this is an interesting choice, and Virgil sheds a little bit of light on this at the end of this canto as to Dante the poet's decision. Why give them all this ability to see far into the future? But one more thing I want to point out about Chiako. I know I'm skipping over things. You might have a particular line you were hoping I would go over, but there is so much in Dante that if I went line by line by line, I think we'd be here for a million years. So I'm teaching this pretty much like I do in class. Around line 85, right before Chiako just checks out, his last request is this: "But when you move again among the living, oh, speak my name to the memory of men. Having answered all, I say no more." He and most of the souls, until we get really far down, want to be remembered. That's why they're talking to Dante at all. They want Dante to tell their story. So there's this meta sense that this is what Dante wrote down after returning from the Inferno. They want their story to live on, even though they're incapable of living on. And again, once we get to the very, very worst sins, we start to encounter people who don't want to be remembered, but that is the exception. Okay, and then the end of this canto, as I told you, there's an exchange with Virgil, and Virgil explains, in a way, why the souls have this ability to see far into the future. If you look at line 103, Virgil says, "Look to your science again," and that's not science, it's Aristotle, I think, is what he's referring to there. Yeah. So basically, look at Aristotle. Where it is written, the more a thing is perfect, the more it feels of pleasure and of pain. As for these souls, though they can never sort true perfection, still in the new time they will be nearer it than they were before. So what he's saying is that they can't really achieve that pleasure, right? But the more perfect something is, the more it's capable of feeling in general, and pain is really the only option there. So as time goes on, their pain doesn't just stay the same, but instead it increases over time. It's just this compounding pain. And one of the ways that is the case is that ability to see into the future, because at a certain point, according to the Bible and according to Dante, the world is going to end, and then for the souls in the Inferno, there will be nothing to see in the future, far into the future, except their own unending torment, which is really soberingly horrific. If you want a companion text to this that is actually positive, I know a lot of the books you read in English are very sad or upsetting like this. it would be the medieval poem, the English medieval poem Pearl. It's a poem with this dream vision of heaven, and there's almost exactly the opposite described, and it was written almost at the same time as the Inferno, but it's heaven, and people are joyful when they get there, but it's just joy and love compounding and compounding forever. And that it's a beautiful companion piece to this from kind of the other side. All right, that is it. Like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe, get those notifications, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.